me know when y'all can see my screen.
Yep, got it.
Cool.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and kick it off. My name's Tom Wilson. Kind of run the CharlestonJS group, and this is our first virtual meeting of a new format for 2021. And basically, we're going to be meeting weekly every Thursday from 5 to 5:30-ish. May extend if we want, but just 30 minutes, kind of informal, 15 to 20-minute talk, and then lightning talks and any shout outs. This week, we're focused on NodeJS, and then next week we'll do React, and then the following week, I think Dino or functional programming, and then the following Svelte and Vue. But just trying to just give everybody kind of the whole variety of JavaScript. Happy to add more things, and we don't have to just talk about those topics, but just trying to put together something that's more virtual friendly and more signaled. So please give me some feedback either via the Meetup or discussion board, or you can hit me on Twitter at twilson63, or a number of other places to find me, or email me at tom@hyper63.com as well, and I'm twilson63 on Charleston Slack too. Today we have Juan, who's going to talk about Prisma, and this is our Node course, so he's going to spend a few minutes showing us Prisma, which sounds really cool, and I will let him sort of take it from here. So Juan, the floor is yours.
Sorry, I was muted, but thanks, Tom, for that. And definitely psyched to be giving this talk to anybody who will listen. And yeah, I guess it is the first one of the year, so no pressure. But yeah, I'll try to make it cool here. So yeah, so for anybody not familiar, I'm gonna go through kind of a very quick intro, just talking about Prisma a little bit, and then get into a demo. So I really want to focus most of the time on the demo, and then potentially a Q&A after. And if anybody has any questions in the middle of the talk, please feel free to interrupt me. So no worries there. I mean, maybe not interrupt, but I don't know. I don't know what the best format is. But yeah, if you have a question, just ask it, I guess. All right. So yeah. So what is Prisma? So Prisma's an ORM, and I think it would be good to start with an idea of what an ORM is for anybody who isn't familiar. I'm betting most people are, but for anybody who isn't familiar, it stands for Object Relational Mapping, and it basically, for most people, it's essentially a data layer that lives in an application that allows you to interact with your actual database using native application language that you use in the application, and also modeling relationships in that language usually, right? So this is a quick example. So where you would have a query, ORMs typically have query builders that allow you to build things that look like this. So it's all native. For example, if you're building in JavaScript, this is all native JavaScript. So that's the basics. Now, I think it's kind of hard to get away from the fact that ORMs are really highly divisive in the industry. Some people swear by them. Some very many people dislike them. But I mean, honestly, I think it's just about what works for everybody and what works for you and your team when you decide to pick something like this. And these days, most ORMs, including Prisma, have escape hatches if you find yourself in a bind in terms of what it can do and how it can query data. There's always just a very quick kind of raw
He's
SQL.
comfortable.
Excuse me? Oh, sorry, I thought somebody had a question, but I'll just keep going. All right, so why use an ORM at all? A lot of reasons. Number one is you probably suck at SQL. That's kind of why I picked it. No, I'm just kidding. I do believe that there are people who choose it because they're terrible at SQL, but I would not make this. So some of these reasons I want to call out because I don't think they're good reasons to use an ORM. So if you're terrible at SQL, that's probably not the best reason just to pick up an ORM, because then you're just going to continue to be terrible at SQL forever and ever. Now, I'm not a master at SQL, but I think I could make something work even without an ORM, so I'm not too worried about that. So a real reason, I think, is that you want to model your database as objects or something that's native to the application language that you're using, and also map their relationships. So to me, that's a valuable thing to have, is a mapping of all data relationships in the application code that you can actually look through and interact with using native languages or using the language of your application. So that to me is a pretty good reason to use it. Another reason is you want to easily generate dynamic queries without worrying about sanitizing input. So I think this is also a pretty compelling reason, specifically the dynamic queries part, as well as having those queries be, again, in the domain language that you're using, not having to go maintain long SQL query strings or templates or stuff like that could get out of hand when things get complicated. So that to me is a pretty compelling reason. Of course, you should also learn to sanitize input. So that one's a bit of a compromise. But when you're, to me, if there's any question, I would rather have a system do it for me, just in case I make a mistake. So. And then the last one is you want to be able to swap databases while maintaining your data access layer intact. So to me, this falls into the bad reason camp. And I'm not sure how to delineate these. Maybe we can just mark them with red text and say, this is bad. Don't make this a reason to use an ORM, because you're not going to be able to do that. If you decide to swap databases, then the likelihood is that you're going to have to make changes to your ORM layer as well, because even though most ORMs support very many databases with the same language considerations, they do have different quirks and edge cases for each. And if you have a very complex application, I would bet that you are going to run into most of those edge cases from swapping databases. Also, I don't know how common a database swap of an entire application is. Some people here in this room may have done it very many times. I personally have never done it. I have added data access points. I've added different databases to an application as time goes on for different use cases. I don't think I've ever swapped out an entire data access layer in one fell swoop. And I would not advocate for a complete rewrite in that fashion myself, but I don't know how everybody else here feels. So again, I wanted to call these reasons out in case you're thinking about using an ORM, and that's one of the reasons. I personally don't think that should be that, and also you sucking at SQL. I don't think that should be a reason. So that's my thought there. All right. So if you are going to use an ORM, there's obviously a lot of choices. Prisma is one that I've gone with for some recent projects, and I'm just going to talk a little bit about what it is. So it is the easiest way to describe it is that it's a TypeScript first ORM, and it includes a few things. So it includes, number one is schema generation from your database schema. So personally, I find this to be really ergonomic, really useful, just really great to work with. So Prisma will introspect, they call it introspection, your database that you give it, and generate a schema for you. So I find that to be really cool. Like it a lot, and I continue to use it to this day. Some cases you need to modify your schema manually, but having the schema be generated by Prisma as a first pass is really helpful, especially when you have a really large database. So next up is a relational data model. So the schema will include relationships based on what it introspects. And that model will be, those relationships will be available to you when you actually interacting with your database. So for example, you will know which relation a user row has based on what the schema is. And you'll know that in your editor as you're typing, which is amazing. So I personally really like that. And then type-safe query building. So this is part of what is called Prisma client. And as you generate a schema, then you can generate a Prisma client, which generates a series, I mean, in the hundreds of typings, data types, TypeScript data types, specifically about your data. So it knows which arguments certain functions take. So for example, creating a resource has a specific set of arguments. Finding resources has a specific set of arguments. And once those types are generated, the client is really a breeze to use, because as soon as you start typing, you essentially know what lives somewhere and what is optional, what is not optional, what types each thing supports, it doesn't support, what's nullable, et cetera, et cetera. So once you have that, things really become real easy. So so yeah, that's kind of a quick overview of that. So the last slide I had is why Prisma. I think I kind of covered that in the what is Prisma. So really, what I want to talk about here is just why I chose it, and really it just goes back to these things. So I would say for me personally, that one of the main reasons was I have picked up TypeScript pretty heavily, both at work and in my personal projects. And recently I started just a hobby project and in TypeScript, and was having a hard time finding a TypeScript first ORM that would actually type check my database layer. So finally I found Prisma, and it's still kind of in its infancy, but this is a hobby project, so I decided to take the plunge and go for it. Now, Prisma, from my understanding, is used in production by very many companies. So I think it is definitely production safe. It's to the point where it's mature enough. But I would say there are a few things that would make it, mature to the point where it does everything you need it to out of the box. I think there are a few edge cases that need to be ironed out still in the current version. So that is, again, the quick recap of that. And now I just want to move on to a demo just to show some of the, first of all, how you get set up and roughly what the workflow is when you're working with Prisma, and how easy or hard it makes certain things, or how it looks. So the way that I want to go about this, and by the way, if anybody has any questions so far, please feel free to interrupt. Or
can you hear me?
Yeah, Peyton,
awesome.
Go for it.
Yeah, so I was looking into building a small web app last year, and I was looking a lot into Prisma and similar ORMs, but I was moving a little bit towards using Mongo as my database, and I didn't really see the purpose of using, Prisma doesn't really support MongoDB at the moment, but is there any point in using an ORM like Prisma for a non-relational database?
Yeah, I think you could apply something very similar. I don't know that it exists personally, but I've used Mongoose in the past when working with MongoDB. I don't know if there is a TypeScript or type-safe version of Mongoose. And as you said, I don't know that it would be as useful in a NoSQL database, because NoSQL schemas are notoriously difficult to make strict, or to rely on the strictness of, I should say. So yeah, I guess that it's hard to say. I still think that using an ORM was useful for me when I've worked with Mongo. I found Mongoose to be useful. I would not say it's as useful as Prisma, for example. And in many cases, I've seen people kind of build their own data access layers and kind of like query formats for Mongo that they kind of roll on their own. It seems pretty easy to do it that way as well.
Okay, awesome.
Anybody else? But the FAQ, just in case anybody, we can go through this at the end when we kind of have a Q&A section. It's really, I think this is probably going to answer your question better than I can in most cases. But I also want to call out what Peyton said. So there is no Mongo support for Prisma. It's only for relational databases at this time. So if you work with NoSQL databases, this is probably not going to help you right off the bat. And hopefully you move to a SQL database at some point and enjoy the really, really hard migration process. All right, so yeah, so let's go through this. So I have a local database. It's a Postgres database, and it has. I was thinking maybe we could start from scratch so you guys can see the process. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to delete all of these tables. I have a users table, a post table, and a likes table. So users have posts and posts have likes. It's pretty basic. I feel like I could recreate this pretty quickly on the spot without making any mistakes. But just as I said that, I'm probably going to make a lot of mistakes. But let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this database, this table if I can. There we go. And there we go. So now my database has nothing, which is always fun. So here we go. And so here I have actually created a template project. All the code is written already. I definitely didn't want to go through and write all this code in the middle of a demo. That would have been too time consuming. But it's a basic Express server, and we're going to ping it using Postman just to show how things work. So I have a bunch of, by the way, is this too zoomed out? Should I maybe do this? Is that better? Just a little bigger?
Yeah, that's better.
Sweet. If anybody still can't see it, let me know, and I will zoom in more. All right, so yeah, so here it's a basic Express server. I have a list of, I have a folder just with some controllers and routers. I'm just using a quick, like a router controller pattern here, nothing really too crazy. And I have no validation, no authentication, none of that. We're just gonna make some posts to our Express server. So we're gonna make it easy. Now, the first thing that you'll notice is that in my database folder, there's a folder called Prisma. And here we have a file called schema.prisma. And here we have a little Prisma logo on the icon. This is, so there is a VS Code extension to help you write your Prisma schema. So as you type, you can kind of see, for example, if I want to make a relation here in the schema, it'll actually help me out by auto-completing based on what it knows from the schema. Now, this schema that you see right here, I had generated just as testing out the stuff that I was going to do in the talk, but we're going to go ahead and delete it because there's no data in our database, so there's obviously no schema. So it shouldn't know any of this stuff in theory, right? So if we run, the way you generate a schema is by running the command prisma generate. Now I have a alias with an npm script, so I'm going to run it here. Prisma introspect. This is going to actually look at my database based on the environment variable and then see what's in there. And it should find nothing. It should say you have nothing. So what are you trying to do here, dude? Yeah, so there we go. So there's basically nothing in the table, and it just errors out. So no tables. Sorry, nothing in the database. So that's what it does. That's pretty simple. Just want to show real quick what that command actually looks like. So Prisma generate just looks like this. This is Prisma has a CLI, so I've just aliased the Prisma generate command with my schema and my source file and everything to an npm script. But it really generally would look something like this. All right, so let's go ahead and add a table. Let's add our users table. New table. I'm going to go through the UI just so things are super clear in terms of what we're doing. And we're going to call this users, and we're going to add some columns. So we have a user ID, which is going to be a UUID. This is our primary key for this table. The user is going to have a first name. I'm just going to make it text. I'm not worrying about data types or whether I'm going to accept X characters or whatever. Just going to make it text and be done with it. And then we're going to have a last name, and that's going to be text. So one thing I'm going to try out here, just so you guys can take a look, is let's say the first name is going to be required and the last name is not going to be required. And let's go ahead and save that. All right, so now we have a table, and we're going to go ahead and run our introspect command once more. All right, cool. So now it actually created a model. Let's take a look at that model, see what that looks like in our schema file. So we have model users. This is the table name. And then we have all the properties here. And you can see we have a question mark here next to last name because that's optional. And that was pretty simple. Now, one thing that you also notice, so for anybody who does JavaScript, I'm assuming everybody here because you're in a NodeJS meetup, most 99% of people who are building things in JavaScript are using camel case. And Postgres definitely prefers snake case. That's kind of the best practice if you're using Postgres. Everything is in snake case. So this is one of the nice little abstractions that you have when you're using an ORM is you could actually just say, I want this to be called last name, and I'm going to go ahead and map it. Map is a function of Prisma, and I'm going to map it to last name. Cool. So now it's going to actually find the last name row in the database, but when I'm in my application, I can actually just use this little last name camel case. Just a nice little ergonomic change there. So one of the things that I discovered is though when you're going through this, hey, you don't want to do this for every single property when you have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds to take and data attributes on tables, right? So there is actually a schema transformer for Prisma. We're going to go ahead and run it because I already have it installed in alias to a script. So npm run transform schema. And that is going to do exactly what we want it to do, which is it's going to camel case all of our attributes, map them to the correct column, and then also it Pascal cased our model, which again, this is just best practice, like things that people are used to. That's what I'm used to, so that's what I like, so that's what I did. And it maps into the users table. So that's what we've got. Now, let's go ahead and try to run a query now that we have an actual schema. So the queries are going to be in our user controller. Typically, I would build a service to make queries from controllers, but again, this is just for demo purpose. So we're going to run our queries directly in our controller. So here, the format of running a Prisma query is you essentially import the client, and Prisma will know from the client what entities you have and which queries you can perform on those entities. So one of the things that you'll notice here is if I go to users, this all seems to be okay. However, going to posts, it still seems to be okay, but I know that I have no posts in my schema. Now, why is that? Why is it not giving me an error? This is supposed to be TypeScript is supposed to know if I actually have a post entity in my Prisma client. The reason it doesn't know is because I haven't generated an updated client. So if you'll recall, I went ahead and deleted the whole schema from our schema file. However, the Prisma client does not get updated automatically. You can actually create a post install script that runs whenever you change the schema, and it'll create a new client. For now, we're going to do it manually because I want to show every little step. So that's what that looks like. So typically, the steps are you introspect your database, and then you generate a client. I have an in-between step, which is the schema transform. That's just personal. You don't have to do that if you don't want. But we're going to run npm run prisma generate. So this is going to generate our client, which then we can start making. Then we can trust that the client actually matches the schema. And once we do that, we'll see something very peculiar with these. So let's give it a second to update, and now TypeScript is doing its thing. And eventually it's going to throw an error here because this doesn't exist. At least if I did it right. We'll see. That's the case. Again, real quick. Oh, sorry. I did. Or maybe TypeScript's not running because my Zoom is using all my CPU. That's also a possibility. Oh, there we go. Finally did it. All right, so we have an error here. Yeah, so this is the error. So I have a query that actually tries to find my users' posts and their likes. Those don't exist anymore. I deleted them from the database. So let's go ahead and comment this out and we'll get rid of that error. Let's see what else. We have other errors here. Oh, I didn't put an email down for the user in the table. That's fine. We don't really need an email, so we don't need to care about that. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of it. And all of these are now red because we don't have posts in our database. Let's go ahead and comment this whole thing out. Save. And we're gonna get back to it once we generate those tables. All right. So first, we're gonna start with our users. We still have, I believe, an error here somewhere. Nope, no errors here. Oh, there is one error. Oh, I'm trying to find get user posts. We can't find user posts because there are no posts. So let's comment that out. All right, sweet. And now these obviously also need to be commented out. This is the whole process. Okay, our user router, this doesn't exist. But this is one of the cool things about TypeScript, right? I don't know if anybody here has not or has worked with TypeScript, but essentially if you mess something up, you know right away, and it just tells you exactly where the mistake is really easily. So now I've fixed all of my TypeScript mistakes, and we are ready to start our server and ping the Postman. Let's see. Let's take a look at that. Oh, we are not ready to do that. Let's see what the error is. Oh, we're trying to find likes, which don't exist. And this is in the like controller. Let's take a look at that one. Where is that still? I thought I commented everything out. I didn't save it. Cool. All right, let me open Postman. Sorry, it's a little slow. Every time I run Zoom screen share, my computer starts to really struggle. I'm going to go ahead and turn my video off, which helps it quite a bit, but I will keep obviously the screen share. Right. We still have an error. Let's take a look at what that is. It says, oh, importing a light controller. We haven't saved this one either. Save. Okay, everything else is done. Cool. All right, so now let's open up Postman. And here I have a series of queries. So first I'm going to try to get any users that I have in my API. So I'm just calling api./v1/users. And the query looks like this. Let's take a look at that query. The query looks like this. So prisma.user.findMany. Now, find many is basically where you would stick any condition that matches based on the users you want to find. So for example, find many where first name is John or where last name is Cash or what have you. However, if you stick nothing in it, it's just going to find every single user that's in that collection or in that table. So that's what we're trying to do here. And I'm going to show a little bit of detail in the queries as we go on. So this is going to turn an empty array, obviously, because we have no users. So let's go ahead and create one. So here we have the body of a user we want to create. We're going to get rid of the email because I actually did not create the table with emails. And it's just going to be first name and last name. All right. And so we're going to hit our users endpoint with a post request. And let's take a look at what that query looks like. I'm going to go ahead and hide the console here. We don't need that much anymore. And here we have a create user function, which will take first name and last name from the body. Get rid of this console log. And this is how you create something in Prisma. So let me just go ahead and write it from scratch, and you guys can see what that looks like. So let's say create. So when I start typing, first of all, Prisma, I have a variety of things that I can do. here are my resources as well. So you can see users right here, and then I can do any amount of operations on my user. You can see all of them here. Find, delete, aggregate, create, count. Obviously, there's aggregation queries, there's grouping, et cetera, et cetera. So let's go ahead and just use our create query, and it's going to tell me exactly what it takes. So it takes a data object. Now, the data object is what has the data for the user. That's pretty self-explanatory. So let's go ahead and add it. It's an object. It has a data key. And here, let's see what it tells us about the data for that user. First of all, we have an error. So is missing the following properties. It's missing an ID, and it's missing first name. It's not missing last name because last name is optional. We marked that as optional in the database. And it is missing an ID and first name. So let's go ahead and say ID. We're going to just generate that using UUID. V4. Easy peasy. And we still have an error in our data because we don't have a first name. So let's go ahead and add the first name. And that's just going to, that's just shorthand because we already declared it up here, and it's going to take it right from the body. Now, this is not red anymore. We're looking good. We can create a user with just the first name. We don't care about the last name. Let's go ahead and do that. So I've saved. Actually, let me go ahead and add the last name here. This is just going to be optional, but we're going to add it anyway. Go back to Postman, make sure that our build is running. Okay, our server is up again. And here is our query posting users. We're going to create a user Jimmy page. Here we go. Cool. We have a user. His last name is there, et cetera, et cetera. And now we're going to query our users collection again. And now we have an array of users that includes our user Jimmy page. Easy peasy. All right, so far so good. Next up, let's add a post table. Our users are going to have posts. So let's see what these posts should have. Let's go to our Postgres database, create a table. Obviously, if you're doing this in real life, you'd probably run a script, create all these, you run a bunch of SQL scripts, but we're not doing that because we're terrible at SQL. That's why we're using an ORM. All right. ID. This is our primary key. And then posts are going to have title. It's going to be text. Text is not going to be null, but let's say that the description is also text, but it's optional. We're just going to say it's optional. And the post is going to have a user ID because that is going to belong directly to the user. All right, cool. So we need to add that relation. Let's add it as a foreign key. df key. And that is going to go from our user ID to users table mapping on the ID. Cool. All right, so the next step, if anybody recalls, does anybody recall what we should do now that we have a new table? No, nobody's paying attention. That's okay. All right.
Regenerate the schema.
Yes, thank you. I can't see who said that, but I'm glad somebody's participating. All right, let's do that. Let's regenerate our schema. I'm gonna go ahead and delete this. You don't really have to delete the schema. I don't know. I just do it because I'm OCD. But let's do npm run prisma introspect. Cool. Now we have posts and we have users. Now let's take a look at what that looks like, right? First of all, let me transform it because it looks prettier. So npm run transform schema. All right, awesome. So we know we have our posts here. Obviously, it has a title description. It has a user ID, but it also has a user. Now, this is a completely virtual piece of data. Obviously, this doesn't exist in the table. We don't have a whole user object in the table. This is relation was just created for us by Prisma. And if we decide to pull it if we decide to make a query, we can decide whether or not we want to include that user as the result of that query, which is really simple and also very cool. And then here, user has now been given posts, which is an array of posts, post array. So again, same deal. If I pull my user, now I can decide whether or not I want to include posts for that user. And that goes for everything else that goes down the relational line. I'll kind of show that a little bit later. So let's go and now generate our client. Just keep in mind that all of these things would be running mostly in the background once you have an application deployed. Like all these scripts are going to essentially be running by CI pipelines, right? All right, so now we should have a new schema. Now we should have a post entity in our client. So let's go ahead and see if that's true. Let's uncomment all of our post related code. I don't see any errors so far, which means that I think we're good. And let's go ahead and uncomment our post router so we can make requests and create posts. All right, awesome. Let's go ahead and go to Postman. I think we should be good to go. So in Postman, same deal. We have a GET request to get all posts. Let's go ahead and do that. Oh, you know what I forgot? I'm not running the server. Let's go ahead and run it. Okay, that's running, and we're going to get our posts. And we have no posts, obviously. We haven't created any posts. So let's go ahead and create one. We need a user ID to create a post because posts require user IDs. So here is a post. We're going to replace this user ID. This is our post endpoint for posts, posting posts. And let's take a look at the query. It's going to be pretty much exactly the same as our user query. We have prisma.post. Oh, that's not it. This is it. Prisma.post.create, and then we pass it data based on exactly what we need. Now, this is new. This is a new syntax. I don't think anybody's seen that because it's new. So let's talk about that. I'm going to write it from scratch like we did before, just because I like to make things hard. All right, so we want to create a post. We need to pass it a data object. I know that because Prisma tells me exactly what to do. It's pretty cool. Well, actually, TypeScript does it, but I don't know. Who's in charge? I don't know. All right, so it's obviously failing because it needs all this stuff that is obviously necessary, like an ID. You can't create anything without an ID. Makes no sense. All right. And then we're going to need a title, which is going to be the title that I'm destructuring above here in the body. Then the description, I don't know how to write. And lastly, we need to give it a user ID. Now, here's something interesting. It doesn't really fail if we don't give it a user ID. Why is that? Anybody care to venture a guess? It's because I made a mistake, by the way. Let's take a look. It is because user ID is nullable. It doesn't care if it has a user, but we do actually care. So let's go ahead and save that. And let's go through our whole rigmarole. That was just my mistake, guys. Sorry about that. Let's go to our schema. I'm going to go ahead and delete this stuff. I don't care about you anymore. Introspect. Okay. Now, yeah, now it doesn't have a question mark, so that's good. And we're going to do Prisma transform schema. And we're going to generate our client. And now we're going to run our server. All right, let's go back to our post controller where we were finishing writing up this query. Now, it's still throwing an error. Again, it takes a little bit for my computer to kind of catch on this when it's under heavy load, but it will error out and tell me that actually, oh, there it is. So property user is missing. So yeah, it needs to have a user related to the post. Let's go ahead and add that. So how do we add a relation? This is pretty interesting. So it's basically connecting an existing resource in your database. So there is a connect statement, and you connect it where ID is user ID. So what this is doing is saying, hey, what user ID you gave me in the body, that's the user ID I'm going to use to connect on the ID field for this resource. So the other thing you can do is you can actually create the resource if you don't have it. So if you wanted to run a request where your user is creating an account, for example, because they want to post something. So I'm on a website. Hey, I want to post something, but I don't have an account. I write the whole post. It lets me write the post as a guest. And then when it's time to post it, it says, oh, now you need to create an account. We can do both of those things here at the same time and say, create a post. And then there is a create statement, which you can actually pass data to. So you could say create. You can see it auto-completes this right here. And it'll tell you exactly what you need to create your user. So we're going to create a user. Again, we're not going to do this. I'm just going to show you what it looks like. And it says this is missing the properties from type user create without post input. User create without post input is essentially a type that's generated in the client, and it needs an ID and a first name. So again, and it's the same exact type that we used to create a user in the first place. So let's say ID is my ID. This is obviously not a UUID, but whatever. We don't care about that. First name, name. So now it doesn't complain. And this operation is going to create a post and a user simultaneously. Again, pretty nifty. And those two things are going to be related. I personally use these a bunch to create resources that have nested relations. So for example, if you're creating an invoice and the invoice has items, so you can create both at the same time, and they're going to essentially be connected via the create statement. Pretty nifty. For now, we're going to stick with connect because that's what we're doing here.
So that's just for foreign keys.
Excuse me?
That's just for foreign keys between relations of different tables.
That's correct. Yes.
Awesome. That's pretty cool. I actually like that syntax a lot.
Yeah, it's I agree with that. It's very cool. Personally, I like it. There's one thing that I found, I'll just kind of call this out just because it's funny, but create new lines. If you're working with Prisma a lot, get used to creating new lines because in some cases, you'll be tempted to continue to write one-liners like this, and then you realize you have like 7 brackets kind of next to each other. So that can be kind of an eyesore. So yeah, again, the habit of creating new lines and things get easier. I'm not gonna do that now because, again, I said we're gonna make things harder just for fun. But yeah, and this is obviously a very small line anyway. We don't care. All right, so let's go back to Postman. And we don't have posts. We already went through that. We're going to create one. So this is a post. We're going to post our user's endpoint. We already went through what that query looks like. It has a title. It has a description. It has a user ID. Let's make sure our user ID, let's see what happens if we actually pass it something that makes no sense, right? This user ID doesn't exist in the database. And we're going to try to say, hey, Prisma, create me a post with this user. And Prisma's going to say, what? There's an error on that. And let's go look at the console and see what that looks like. The error looks like this. User-facing error. What does it look like? I don't know what it looks like. But that's a bad error, actually. We should probably talk about that. But it's a bad error. But the truth is, it errored out because it essentially couldn't find the user. Right? That user doesn't exist. So there's probably a better way to do this that I haven't found out yet because I haven't cared enough. But let's go ahead and pass it the real user ID that we want to do here. All right, so that's a real user ID, and that works. Awesome. Now let's go back and query for all the posts that we have in the database, and we have that post. Awesome. Now, here's something nifty that this is for me that I found nifty. So in a lot of cases, I found that shaping user data is one of the most interesting problems in applications as you get bigger. So I'll give the quickest example I can think of. You have a list of users in your application, and you want a query. You want a query that says, give me users, paginate them, etc. Do all these things, right? Now, when you want to get users for a list, the users don't really need to include everything, right? So for example, a user could have posts, it could have likes, it could have photos, it could have files, it could have the workspace that it belongs to, like a bazillion different things, right? And you don't need all those things. So then inevitably you end up creating these shapers all over your application that say, okay, this is the specific shape I want when I pull a list. This is a specific shape I want when I pull the user details, like all these different things, right? So that's something I really like about Prisma and how easy it makes that. Because not only can you do it really easily, but you could also potentially create queries that are really dynamic to give the user that flexibility, even on the endpoint itself. We're not going to go through that here, but you can kind of use your imagination. But let's go ahead and see what that looks like just real quick. So in the users controller, we have the get users endpoint, which we already went through, right? And it gives us an array of users, and those users don't include anything. However, if I want to get user by ID, let's assume that here I'm going to just like display the user's details and all of their things. Now, what I can do is I can use this thing called an include statement, which Prisma provides when you're running a query. And here in the include, we don't have likes yet. Let's not talk about that. I can just say post true. So any posts that that user has created that are related to that user are going to be included in that shape. And now, again, using your imagination, you could imagine how in a request, you could potentially create query parameters that determine what is included in the shape. So this could be controlled completely by the backend, saying, okay, the backend has these specific shapes that we're going to send you in different points, and you have to figure that out. You have to make the right query, the right endpoint. You have to hit the right endpoint. Or you can just say, hey, we're going to give you a bunch of query parameters, and you can just go nuts and say, okay, include posts, don't include posts, include likes, include workspace, etc., and then run a bunch of just conditionals here. So for example, if query posts, let's say that posts is the parameter, right? And now you can just do that. So essentially, if you could imagine, actually, it would be something like rec query. So if my query includes posts as a Boolean to true, then include post, and then so on and so forth for everything that belongs to that user. So that's a very dynamic endpoint that you are creating for your consumers. In most cases, the consumers yourself, so you're making life easier. All right, cool. So we're just going to include posts here. And let's go through that endpoint and see what that looks like. So we have a user. The user ID is this. Make sure we have the right user ID. Then we're going to get user by ID. Where is that endpoint? Here we go, user by ID. So this is users. We're going to pass it an ID. And it's going to do that. So now we have not only the user details, but also an array of all of their posts, because I did that include posts true. Pretty cool. And again, this is just very basic CRUD operations. But I think for me, it's about like a lot of the scalability and the dynamism of when you have an application, how your data comes back. And really what this does is it kind of gives you a very consistent yet dynamic shape. So like, that posts always come back this way, but you don't necessarily have to include them everywhere. The user always comes back this way, but you don't necessarily need to include all of the users anywhere when you, for example, fetch a post. So same deal. So here we fetched posts, right? And it's just an array of posts. So if we wanted to, we could just actually fetch post by ID. I don't know if I have that query somewhere. Maybe I do, maybe I don't. But we can just create it really easily by doing this. So fetch a post by ID, and we could have it include the user. So right now, you can see it's not including the user. Let's go ahead and do that. Post, post controller. And where we fetch a post by ID, we're just going to say, hey, include, and these are all the things I can include. I can include user. That's the only one, because that's the only one thing that's related to posts. True. Sweet. All right, let's fetch that once more. Oh, something errored out, and I didn't notice it, or it wasn't running. I guess it wasn't done compiling. All right, there we go. Now our post comes back with the user. That's cool. Yeah, maybe it's not so cool. It's just a GET request, but I think it's cool. All right. So cool. So I was going to go through and add likes to these posts. And my thought process is a like, essentially, a like has a user ID, and which is the user liking something. And it has a post ID, which is the post being liked. Now, I don't know if we have time now that I'm looking at the clock. So I just want to kind of call out Tom. Tom, what do you think? How are we doing?
Yeah, we got about 8 minutes.
Okay. So I think it's probably best to skip that portion. You guys can imagine what that looks like because it looks very similar to what we've been doing so far. Really, yeah, it's very much the same. So this is, I just want to say, this is mostly just scratching the surface, right? This is the most basic things that you can do with this tool. There are so many more things that you can do. Just as a quick example, I can actually show Schema from a kind of a hobby project that I've been working on, so that you guys can see something a little bit more substantial. I'm just going to show the schema because otherwise it'd take too long to kind of go through everything. But let's do that real quick. All right, so this is schema for a project that I'm working on, and the thing that I want to call out is relations, right? So like every single one of these models has a crazy, well, not crazy, but some of them do have a crazy amount of relations. And once you're like querying data in your application, it's just so very easy to connect things, to include things, to select attributes. I didn't show select, but you guys get the idea. And once this grows, using the client, like having a client that has all of those things typed in a type safe way with attributes for creating, attributes for fetching, for including, it just becomes incredibly, incredibly valuable. So again, this is like, for example, an organization model, and the organization can have a creator and can have clients, can have invitations. So at any point, I can just decide to include any of these things in my organization shape, and it'll fetch them easy peasy, right? No fussing about. And this is interesting because this project, for example, we made a very clear choice. I'm not saying it's the right choice or what have you, but we made a choice to say every resource has to have a created by. And if you, that basically results in this user model basically having all of these created resources that you can fetch for them if you chose to, right? So like, which projects have you created, which organizations have you created, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And as we create more stuff, this user model keeps growing, which I thought was pretty funny. But again, just kind of gives you an idea for how complex things can get, and how something like this can help you manage that. All right, that is, I think, everything given the time constraints that we have. I guess Q&A.
Yeah, we have time for 2 questions. Thank you, Juan, for this presentation. This was really great. Do we have any questions?
I do not, but I just want to say I really appreciate this. It was awesome. I thought it was super cool. I do have to get going, but thanks, Juan, so much. And thanks, Tom, for hosting this.
Absolutely. Thanks, man.
All right. Have a good one.
You too.
Great, guys. Well, thank you guys for joining. As I noted earlier, I will record this and post it on CharlestonJS.com, so you can watch it again or share it with some friends. And we'll be back next Thursday with, I believe, Tyler Hall is going to give a talk, and I can't remember the subject, but it should be a good one concerning React, I think. So thanks for joining in. Thanks, Juan, for the presentation. It was awesome. Prisma looks like an awesome ORM, and they can get a lot of use out of it. So with that, see everybody next week, and thanks for joining.
See you guys. Thank you.